Good morning. Thanks for coming out this morning. My name's Chad Course. I'm the owner and operator of Emergency Restoration Services. Denise did tell you that I'm going to tell you everything you need to know about mold. So we're going to talk about mold today and what you need to know. So what is mold? Mold is actually part of the fungi kingdom. It's not a plant. It's not an animal. It's part of the fungi kingdom, kind of with mushrooms. They're also part of the fungi kingdom, but they're a little bit different. We live in an environment that is full of mold. We will never completely eliminate it. It will always be here, and you should be glad that it's here, because if it wasn't, we'd all be sitting in a big pile of leaves right now, because mold is basically here to decompose decaying organic materials. Mold produces spores, and it's very similar to a plant seed, except it's a lot smaller, anywhere from 2 to 100 microns. And just to put that into perspective, if you took a human hair and looked at it at the diameter, not the length of it, but the diameter, and cut that into 1,000 pieces, that's about the size of 1 micron. So we're looking at something that is very, very tiny. And when you look at a picture like this that is full of mold, that is millions and millions and millions of mold colonies going on there. It's not just a couple small pieces of mold. The number of mold spores suspended in indoor and air fluctuate day to day, season to season, hour to hour. So if we're doing air sampling, it's really important for us to take an indoor air sample as well as an outdoor air sample, so that we can compare those two and come up with a difference and to determine whether there is a mold problem in the air quality or not. Like I said before, mold spores will never be eliminated. If you look at even operating rooms, clean computer rooms, environments where we have state-of-the-art HEPA filtration, even in those great clean environments, we're still going to have mold spores in them, so we'll never have a truly clean, mold-free environment. And I get asked that all the time. You know, I want my house free of mold. Sorry, I'm good, but I can't deliver it. In order to understand mold, we really need to know what is needed for mold growth. There are basically 3 components that we need for mold growth. The first is a mold spore or mold seed, which we already talked about that we're always going to have. And those mold seeds or mold spores kind of drift through the air looking for a new home. And they land on a piece of drywall, which becomes a food source. We have to have a dead organic material for mold to grow. And in this case, it's the paper from the drywall. And then it needs a moisture source. And what you're going to hear in this presentation is that moisture is going to come around over and over and over and over again. And the reason being, it's the one thing that we can control. We can't control the fact that there's mold spores. We can't control the food source because our buildings are built with plenty of food in them. So the way that we're going to control mold is by controlling moisture. Now, everybody knows that if a toilet leaks or a roof leaks, that's a great source of moisture. A lot of times that they're loaded with organics also, and so it becomes a great source for mold. But there's also a lot of less known sources of moisture, such as condensation. This picture actually is a great depiction of that. This is a case where this is in a landlord-tenant situation. The tenant loves nice cold AC, kept his house at 68 degrees in the middle of summer. And over here in the very top corner, you can see just a little part of the square that's poking into it. That was the bathroom vent fan. Bathroom vent fan, unfortunately, the landlord did not fix. And what happened was he would go in, take his nice hot showers. The steam coming off the shower would hit the drywall. It would condensate. And if you look really closely, you can actually see streaking where the water runs down the walls. And so this was a perfect scenario for mold to grow, and actually both bathrooms looked identical. So major remediation here. This is cutting out a lot of drywall, cleaning everything up behind it, and then getting the rebuild process going. And we'll get into remediation a little bit more later in the presentation. So we can have water leaks such as, like I said, toilets and roofs and condensation issues. But when we start dealing with major flooding issues, we really need to get a qualified person involved, whether it's my company, a civil engineer, or I'm sorry, a structural engineer, to look at structural damage as well. And I would caution those that if we get into a flood situation, that you really need to reach out to the professional contractors. It's not something that you want to try to handle in-house. So why is mold bad? Well, EPA and CDC both agree that mold at a minimum is an allergen, meaning that it can produce allergy-like symptoms very similar to if one of you was affected by pine trees, and when pines are in season and they're producing all that wonderful pollen that lands on our cars, you feel terrible. Same thing with mold. They're going to cause an immune response in the body. You don't have to inhale it. You can simply touch it. You can get a dermal contact infection or reaction, no different than touching crab legs if you're allergic to crabs. This can range from something very small, just to some itchy eyes, watering nose, to much more full system immune response, trouble breathing, chest pains. It just depends on the individual. And not every individual is going to have the same response to the same type of mold. Like I said, if you're allergic to pine trees, you're only affected when pines are blooming. When oaks out and blooming in full force, you're not bothered by it. Same thing with mold. The difference is that there are a million types of mold spores out there. So there's a lot of different types of mold. I know just through my personal going through the process, there are certain types of mold that I walk into a building and I immediately feel it in my chest. I lose my voice. And that would be the first one to go out and go grab a respirator or finish our inspection outside and finish talking to our clients. There are other types of mold that I can walk into and I can stay there all day long and it doesn't bother me. So that's going to depend on the individual. And as a society, there's a very small niche of people that have major reactions to mold. There is a much larger contingency that have some light immune responses to mold, but it's something that we definitely need to deal with. One of the other cool things about mold is that some molds can produce something called mycotoxins. And mycotoxins are the mold's defense network. And I like to kind of relate this to the Hatfields and McCoys. Everybody's familiar with Hatfields and McCoys, right? They each had their own part of the land. They both wanted each other's land, and what did they do? They shot each other, try to get the land. In a nutshell, mycotoxins are the same way. The mycotoxins are the guns and bullets that mold use to shoot at the other mold spores to try to take over their land. Instead of trying to take over a mountain, they're trying to take over a little piece of drywall. The problem with mycotoxins are they are toxic. Some of them are carcinogenic, meaning that they can cause cancer. So there are some very significant problems when we start dealing with mycotoxins in molds that deal with mycotoxins, and being able to control that environment and clean it back up so that it's not harmful for your tenants. The amount of mycotoxins that are produced is not really a measurable. There's no way to take a sample of mycotoxins, and so we just know that certain molds are going to produce mycotoxins, and we need to be aware of that. So, mold color. Everybody knows what's the most deadliest mold out there? Black mold. Okay. Myth number one debunked. Just like I said, everybody's going to be a little bit different from each type of mold, and we don't look at mold color as any kind of indication. It means absolutely nothing to me. I've seen yellow, white, green, blue, or purple, some reds, blacks, whites. It doesn't matter. I can tell you that there's some white molds that are in the Aspergillus family of molds, and they produce an infection called aspergillosis, and I have 2 clients that have lost lungs to aspergillosis infections. Now, anybody have ever heard of Aspergillus type mold? It's not something that gets media play, so everybody in the media and most people are pretty much scared of black mold, but there really doesn't matter what the color is. It's all treated the same way. The other thing is toxic mold. Everybody calls it toxic mold. I've yet to see a lab report come back calling something black mold or toxic mold. When people are referring to black toxic mold, they're generally referring to a type of mold called Stachybotrys. And it's, like I said, referred to as the black toxic mold. This is another example of, this is in an attic space. And it's kind of hard to tell. There's actually a lack of insulation at the ceiling level. And in this case, what was happening was This was in the middle of winter, so you had a nice, really cold attic with no insulation between the living space and the attic space, and that heat and moisture was coming up through the drywall. It was hitting the cold plywood and cold framing of the attic, causing a condensation, and once again causing a wide-scale mold problem. And this is actually from the client that I was telling you about with the aspergillosis. She lost a lung over this remediation. She lost a lung due to the mold remediation previous to us, and then we did the remediation and made the house much more livable. So I told you at the beginning, mold prevention, the number one key is moisture control. We can't control the food source, we can't control the mold spores, so the only thing that we can control is moisture control. The key to this is keeping your buildings clean and dry. We deal with a lot of remediations that are dirty houses, and they're damp either from long-term water leaks or HVAC systems that are not removing the moisture from the air and causing condensation issues. If you have a water leak, it is imperative to start the drying process within 48 hours. Within 48 hours is where we start to be able to control mold growth. If we do not dry something in 48 hours, we are having conditions that are very conducive to mold growth. Now, when I say dry it, I don't mean if the carpet got wet and, let's say a toilet leaked into the room and the carpet's wet. It's not just a matter of cleaning up the pile of water, but it's actually drying out the carpet, drying out the subfloor underneath of it, because that's where your mold growth is going to happen. Fixing plumbing leaks in the building envelope as soon as possible. I have a great story about deferred maintenance. A little over a year and a half ago, our company went out and did an inspection for a water leak. Refrigerator had leaked, it had damage, a little bit of drywall behind the refrigerator, a little bit of the vinyl underneath the refrigerator, and one cabinet. I want to say the remediation cost was, to put everything, get it all done, around $2,000. And it was probably about a $5 part to fix it. It was the actual water line for the ice maker that had leaked. Gave the proposal, didn't want to do anything with it. I said, at minimum, you guys have to fix this water leak. You're gonna run into bigger problems. Fast forward 1 year, almost to date, I get a phone call. I recognize the address, recognize the name. I go back out. We ended up doing an $18,000 remediation, and that did not include the cost of the rebuilding. That was to come tear out everything that was bad, fix the problem. So the cost of deferred maintenance in that case is $16,000. Much easier to take care of the problems when it's small. What I would tell you is water and mold does not get better with time. It does not. It doesn't go away. It just doesn't disappear. It stays there. It only gets worse with time. In the buildings, you want to watch out for condensation points, like some of the slides that we've talked about. Keeping your HVAC systems properly working, changing air filters is a big one. Airflow is huge. When your airflow is not happening, we're not exchanging. One of the reasons that air conditioning works also is it removes humidity from the air. And so if we keep our humidity set below between 35 and 55% relative humidity in a building, we can control mold growth. We don't need to have that water source, such as a leaking toilet, to have mold growth. If we start getting over 60% relative humidity in a building, there's enough moisture in the air for the mold to suck that moisture out of the air and start to grow. We see this quite often, especially a lot of times in rental properties where you have an owner that doesn't want to make a necessary repair the right way. And so a closed dryer vent or a bathroom vent fan will be vented into a crawl space or an attic space. Same thing, you're pumping hot, moist air into an unconditioned space, and it's going to cause a condensation issue and cause mold growth. Like I said, ideally 30 to 50% relative humidity is ideal. Over 55, 60 is when we start becoming conducive to mold growth. Home Depot, Lowe's, they sell hygrometers. They're about this big. They give you a moisture reading and a temperature. They're like $19, $20. I have them in my house. They're great because it allows me just to keep an eye on it. I'm in the business. I watch that all the time. Performing regular maintenance, like I said, is key here. Crawl spaces is another big issue in this area. We live in a low-lying area. I don't know how many properties you guys have that have crawl spaces in them, but we do a lot of crawl space remediation, and it's because we live in a low-lying area, we can't deal with groundwater very well here. And so when you find an area that you have standing water, it needs to be dealt with before anything else can be done, and so that it doesn't ruin your property. So avoid mold exposure. Like I said, you can get dermal contact from touching it, so try not to touch it, try not to breathe it. Don't let the mold get into your eyes, nose. Try to keep it out of your system. Avoid breathing the spores. If you're going to go in and do an assessment, we recommend that you at least put on gloves, some sort of eye protection, and N95 is the minimum mask. It's just a regular face mask. It'll have a N95 rating on it. It means that it will filter out 95% of the particulates that you're going to be dealing with if you're going in to disturb something. Common misconceptions about mold. We talked about this one already. Black mold is the only bad mold. No, that's not the case. CDC and EPA both listed as problematic. Common crawl space mold. I've yet to see a lab report that says you have crawl space mold. They're going to be very specific. What I would tell you is that any kind of mold in your building is a problem. If it's not a health concern, that's one thing, but at a minimum, mold is eating away at your building. It's decomposing the structure that holds your building up. So it needs to be dealt with. And once again, here's some nice yellow mold. You know, it's not black, and this is pretty significant too. Bleach. How many people have heard use bleach to kill mold? All right. I'm going to tell you bleach is not the right answer for you. This is where we're going to get a little bit technical for a second. The active ingredient in bleach is sodium hypochlorite. And if you look on a bottle of bleach, it'll always say active ingredient 6% sodium hypochlorite. 94% other inactive ingredients. We'll just call that water. Okay? Most people are going to tell you cut bleach down, maybe 50-50 if you're lucky, maybe a 10% bleach solution. So now you're down even less than 6%. You may be down at 3%. You may be down at 0.6% of the active ingredient that's going to kill the mold that you're putting on. But you're at 94 to 99% by volume water. Okay? Here's what bleach does. The ionic structure of hyposodium chloride does not penetrate into porous building materials such as drywall, semi-porous building materials such as wood framing, trim, things of that nature. Now, what it will do is just like using bleach to bleach out your white shirt and get the stains out of it, it's going to do the exact same thing to the mold. It will get rid of the staining, it'll get rid of the discoloration caused by the mold. However, the ionic structure does not allow it to penetrate down into the substance where the mold roots are growing. So it doesn't kill the root at the mold. It just discolors it and makes it so you don't see it anymore. The problem is that water does penetrate down, and it does feed the mold growth. And what the slide says is Duke University actually did a long-term study on this and showed that using bleach in water solutions actually amplify mold growth long-term in porous building materials. So bleach is not your answer. Kills, my other good friend. Applying Kills over a sealer or over mold does not get rid of the mold. Mold remediation truly is about removing mold. It's not about me coming in and putting a chemical on it and killing it. It's about me physically removing it. So putting something over top of it, like Kills, is only going to cover it up. And how many of you are in property management? Okay. This covering up mold could lead you into costly litigation. People tell me I'm expensive. I challenge you and tell you that I'm cheap when you compare me to litigation. Okay? Covering it up with Kills, bleaching it out, those are the things that are going to get you guys into trouble when you're dealing with property management situations. So if we find mold, what's next? And in this picture, this is actually two separate pictures. You have an HVAC closet here, and that's the backside around this wall. There's some mold growth at the top and at the bottom. This was a result of tenant upstairs flooded out the downstairs unit. Nothing was ever done by the property management to dry it. And lo and behold, about 7 days later, the tenant comes home and this is what they find. What should you do in that situation? That's a large-scale mold problem. You're going to have to deal with a contractor. It's not something that the average handyman is going to take care of. It's not the situation of the average property management maintenance team is going to take care of. You're going to be looking at hiring a contractor in that situation. Get them out there to write a scope of work of what needs to be done. This is remediation in a nutshell. There's a lot more to it, but we don't have the time to go in. But there are a couple of key things that we want to address. The first thing that we want to do is we want to contain the area. And in the picture in the background, you can see the door has been sealed up with duct tape and plastic. There's actually some more walls built out around this that are not in the picture frame. The second thing we do is we set up a negative air HEPA filtration. HEPA is high efficiency particulate air. Removes 99.97% of particles, 0.3 microns or larger. And mold is in that 0.2 to 100 microns. So it's cleaning the air, capturing the mold into the filter, and discharging clean air into an area. And what we do is we set it up in a way that it's a negative pressure. So the area that we're working during mold remediation is actually sucking air from clean rooms into that room so that any mold that goes into the air isn't allowed to escape the area that we're working in. And this is that same unit that we were looking at. They've removed the drywall. Drywall is considered porous by every standard, and there's no way to physically clean drywall. It has to be removed and disposed of. So in this case, they've removed the drywall. All the framing is then sanded, HEPA vacuumed, scrubbed. It's treated with a biocide, which is a chemical that's used to kill mold, make sure that there's nothing else that's going to grow after we're done, and sanitize the remaining furnishings and fixtures in that area. Once all that's done, then we perform a clearance test that's done through a third party, either a third party or through us. And if we do our own testing, it's sent to a third party laboratory that does all of our analysis for us. So it's not me going home at night and looking through a microscope telling you what kind of mold you had. Well, I thank you guys for all your time and attention.